Hey everyone, are you ready for today's horror story? This story takes place a few years back when I was young and reckless. I may have forgotten some details, but never mind. This story will still scare you to your core. So, tuck yourself in, relax, put on your headphones, close your eyes, and enjoy. My name is Stephen Miller, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that running from your problems doesn't solve them. I thought I'd left it all behind. The dead-end job, the failed relationship, the nights lying awake wondering where it all went wrong. Climbing was supposed to be my escape, my way of proving I still had control over something. After my girlfriend, or should I say my ex-girlfriend Hannah, left, she told me one thing I couldn't forget. You can't keep shutting out the world, Stephen. One day, it'll find you. At the time, I brushed it off as another jab at my tendency to disappear when things got tough. But now, as I sit here recounting what happened on Denali, I can't help but wonder if she was right. I should have never gone up that mountain. But at the time, it felt like the right thing to do. You see, climbing had always been my way of escaping work, escaping people, escaping myself. Mount McKinley, or Denali as it's known now, was supposed to be my greatest challenge yet. I'd trained for months, researched every route, and saved up enough leave from my miserable desk job to spend 2 weeks alone in the Alaskan wilderness. I wanted solitude. I got something else entirely. It started on the third day. The weather had been holding up better than expected, and I was making good time. I'd set up camp at around 12,000 feet, planning to push higher the next morning. The plan was simple: ascend, document my progress, and descend before the weather turned. The rangers had warned me about sudden storms, but I was confident, too confident. That night, as I lay in my tent listening to the wind scrape across the ice outside, I heard something. Not the usual groaning of the glacier or the distant crack of shifting snow. No, this was different. It was deliberate, rhythmic, footsteps. At first I dismissed it as paranoia. High altitudes mess with your mind, and I was exhausted. But the sound kept coming, crunching through the snow outside my tent, slow and steady. I held my breath, straining to hear beyond my own pounding heartbeat. Then it stopped. Right outside. I reached for my headlamp, flicking it on with shaking hands. The thin walls of my tent glowed faintly, and for a moment, nothing happened. No shadow, no movement, just the wind. I exhaled, feeling ridiculous. But then, there it was again, the crunch of boots. Close. Too close. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out, the cold biting at my face. My headlamp beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but endless snow and jagged rock. I scanned the area, feeling my pulse in my throat. No tracks. Nothing. I zipped the tent shut and told myself it was the wind shifting the snow. It had to be. But the next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. About 10 feet from my tent, there were footprints. Not mine, someone else's. They led off into the distance, disappearing over the ridge. I stood there for a long time, staring at them, trying to figure out how they got there without me seeing or hearing more. Who else would be up here, alone, without any sign of a tent or gear? I told myself it was another climber, maybe someone passing through, though it didn't make sense. I pushed on, trying to shake the unease creeping into my chest. But as the day went on, the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. By late afternoon, I was higher up, somewhere around 14,000 feet, when I spotted something in the distance. At first, I thought it was a rock formation, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. It was a tent, a small, faded one, half buried in ice. It looked old, too old. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching through the snow. The fabric of the tent was torn in places, flapping weakly in the wind. I hesitated before reaching out and pulling the flap open. Inside, there was nothing. No sleeping bag, no gear, no sign that anyone had been there recently. Just an empty tent, frozen solid and abandoned. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. Scratched into the fabric of the tent's inner wall were 3 words. Don't look up. I stepped back, my breath fogging in the freezing air. My eyes darted up instinctively, scanning the ridgeline above me. Nothing, just the endless white expanse. But the feeling that I wasn't alone was stronger than ever. I left the tent behind and kept moving, faster now. I told myself I'd summit and get the hell off this mountain as soon as I could. But no matter how far I went, the feeling followed me. That night, I camped at 16,000 feet. I was too tired to eat, too tired to think. I crawled into my sleeping bag and tried to convince myself that everything was fine. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined those footprints, that tent, the words. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, I heard it again. The footsteps, coming closer. I held my breath, listening. This time, I didn't move. I didn't turn on my headlamp. I just lay there, heart hammering against my ribs, hoping, praying it would go away. But it didn't. The sound circled my tent, slow and deliberate. I could hear the crunch of snow, the soft shift of fabric as something, or someone, brushed up against my tent wall. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the knife I kept in my sleeping bag for emergencies. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes, the sun was rising, and everything was still. Too still. I unzipped the tent slowly and looked outside. There were no footprints. None. Not even mine from the night before. The snow around my tent was untouched. I packed up as fast as I could and started my descent. I didn't care about reaching the summit anymore. I just wanted to get off that mountain. But as I hiked down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, something standing there. But there was never anything. 2 days later, when I finally reached the base camp, I told one of the rangers about the old tent I found. He gave me a strange look, then asked me to describe it. When I did, his face went pale. "There's no old tent up there," he said. "Not anymore. We cleared it out years ago." I didn't argue. I just nodded and left. The night after I returned home, I had a strange dream. I was back on the mountain, standing outside my tent. But I wasn't alone. There was someone else with me, their face hidden by shadows. They were holding something, a camera, and they were smiling. When I woke up, my heart was racing. I grabbed my phone, needing to ground myself in reality. But when I opened my camera roll, my stomach turned to ice. There was a photo, a picture of me, asleep in my tent, taken from outside, and then I noticed the timestamp. It was from the first night on the mountain. That's when I saw the final detail I'd missed earlier. In the corner of the photo, faint but unmistakable, was the same warning I'd seen scratched into that tent, written in the snow near my head. Don't look up. I haven't slept properly since. I've tried to rationalize it, to convince myself it was altitude sickness, hallucinations, anything but what it seemed. But deep down, I know the truth. I wasn't alone up there, and whatever followed me down that mountain, it's still watching.